So when it comes to a Dalek story and a Cyberman story right next to each other, I have found there always tends to be a clear winner. So with the 10th Planet and the Power of the Daleks, in my opinion, Power of the Daleks easily wins out. Then when it comes to Evil of the Daleks and Tomb of the Cybermen equalise. So, is this the decider? In which case, who wins? Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at the final story of Season 12. So I have made mention about Season 12's baby steps and about how it decided to move away from the Pertwee era almost by channeling the later Troughton one. So there's a distinct latter 60s vibe that I detect running through the Ark in Space and the Sontaran experiment before Genesis of the Daleks just comes along, and it seems like this new era has found its mojo. But I do believe that Genesis of the Daleks, while broadcast before this one, was in fact filmed afterwards. So maybe this accounts for what I then feel like is a distinct step backwards. So yes, when it came to subsequent Dalek Cybermen stories, they were equalised, but Genesis has seen the victory for the Daleks. I think I read somewhere that every single Doctor Who story is someone's favourite, which is obviously then must be true for Revenge of the Cybermen. But its reputation isn't stellar. I think I've got to conform to cliche a little bit and agree with that. Like, first of all, those Troughton vibes that I detected in the two early stories, Ark in Space and Sontaran Experiment, they're going nowhere here. And a lot of that might be to do with the employment of the Cybermen. Obviously, that's a huge factor. But it's actually the stuff on Voga feels very Second Doctor to me as well. It's strange to note that the Cybermen haven't featured since way back in the Invasion, because once I realise that, it just serves to highlight that I haven't actually missed them at all. As disappointing as the story ultimately was, it was a tiny bit nice to see some Daleks again in Day of the Daleks. But here, I get nothing. Nothing whatsoever. And I think that's because of how, I've come to believe that the Cybermen were run into the ground far more than the Daleks were. When they made their first appearance in the 10th Planet, they were outstanding creations, eliciting all sorts of emotions, oh the irony, stemming from the very nature of them, what they really are and what they'd done to themselves. An unsettling design and voice built them up to be something really quite special. But with each resurfacing, while some of the stories may have been better than their debut, they themselves became less and less interesting until I didn't really notice that they'd stopped popping up. On previous marathons, their reappearance here never really gets anything from me, sadly, and the same is true this time. And watching Doctor Who in order from the very beginning obviously then makes you watch the show in a different context from how you normally would when you pick stories in isolation. And I was thinking about this when I was walking the dogs this morning, because I knew I was going to be doing this video. And I think, though they are one of Doctor Who's most celebrated monsters, I actually don't think their full potential was ever reached. While they undoubtedly caught on, they clearly did. You've got Doctor Who, you've got the Daleks, and then you've got the Cybermen. The Cybermen are easily one of its more iconic and enduring creations. So this is purely just personal opinion, when I kind of have to face up to the fact that the Cybermen don't really do anything for me. And so because I feel like that, I can't help but think that the trajectory that they did take to become one of Doctor Who's most enduring creations is just down to their volume of appearances. Now, of course, they had that many appearances and they did keep coming back precisely because they did catch on, and their initial conception was obviously woven into public maybe anxieties and discussion about transplants and where that eventually might end up. And so at their heart, there's an amazing idea, and I think that's why I've always been reluctant to face up maybe to the fact that I don't particularly think the Cybermen have lived up to that potential. And I hold out hope that they do, and in fact, they have. There are excellent stories where the Cybermen are used particularly well. However, I'm not entirely sure they're in the TV show. And it's quite fitting, since we've just spoken about Genesis of the Daleks and about how going back to the origins of the Daleks found a way to sort of like re-energise them. And Spare Parts, Big Finish's Fifth Doctor audio story Spare Parts, does a similar thing in going back to the origins of the Cybermen. And within that, I think you've got the greatest use of the Cybermen within any corner of Doctor Who, and therefore probably the greatest Cyberman story. And because I don't think they've been that good on TV, the fact that they have been elsewhere shows me that obviously I think there's mileage in the Cybermen. And again, it also shows me that, I mean, what do I know? They kept coming back. They became recognisable. It's just that when I think about their TV stories, while they were undoubtedly the very best thing in their debut, were they the best element in the moon base? I mean, possibly, but it is slim pickings. Best element of Tomb of the Cybermen? Not in my opinion. In my opinion, the best element of Tomb of the Cybermen is, one, the Doctor and his handling of all the disparate guest characters. Were they the best element in The Wheel in Space? Absolutely not. And were they the best element in The Invasion? They weren't even the best villain in The Invasion. I'm not trying to be needlessly contrarian or rub anybody up the wrong way. I know they're popular and have their fans. I'm not even saying that the Daleks are the best elements in each of their stories, but the Daleks as a creation do resonate with me in a way the Cybermen just haven't. When much is made of their origins and how they used to be us, then they're onto something. But not enough is made of that in each of their subsequent appearances on TV. Certainly not here. Here they're just the metal aliens they came to be before they shuffled off for a bit. And in fact, the Doctor even calls them machine creatures. Which isn't wholly inaccurate, but it hardly does justice to the brilliant idea that lies behind the Cybermen. And as they came to be handled rather badly towards the end of the 60s, unfortunately they enjoy no renaissance here. The Cybermats were something I was never truly 100% on anyway, but the fact that they're now the size of dogs really does nothing to improve them. They can hardly sneak around like they could before, which I thought was the whole point of them, and it obviously becomes very hard for them to convince in their attacks on people. Like Sarah being mauled by one as a cliffhanger is great in theory, but as you're watching it, you're just sort of reminded of Michael Parkinson being mauled by Emu. But what really doesn't help the Cybermen in their first appearance in 7 years is the fact that these are the worst Cybermen we've seen yet. In much the same way that the Daleks of Day of the Daleks were the dampest, squibbiest of all Daleks up until then, the Cybermen of Revenge of the Cybermen are the same. Not in terms of capability, per se. When they board the beacon, they promptly kick ass in as efficient a way as we've seen from most monsters on Doctor Who, but they are mishandled in other ways. And here we've got the germs of why I don't particularly care for any of the Cybermen going forward in the classic series. And I've got problems with the Cybermen of the new show for other reasons. And that is, their voices are starting to show emphasis. And while not yet declaring excellent like they will come to, emphasis in speech must come from emotion. Surely it comes from emotion. If you care about something, it shows in your speech, in how you emphasize it. You emphasize it in speech, no matter which way you care about something. If you love something, it's there. If you dislike something, it's there. Surely that's where emphasis in speech comes from. So their speech patterns are now not monotonous enough to convey what it was that was terrifying about the Cybermen in the first place. And that's why I think the 10th Planet voices were spot on, because they weren't monotonous, but neither did they have emphasis in them. And in fact, actually, it was a little bit like a machine's way of trying to feign emphasis. All of that worked incredibly well. When you've got the Cybermen talking like they do here, and especially like they do in the 80s, you've lost something of them. And so this reminder that it now doesn't actually get any better when it comes to the Cybermen for me has me crestfallen. It's one of those things where I know my point on the marathon, I know how much there is to come, and it now makes me feel like the Cybermen are just a write-off. And in fact, actually, one of Doctor Who's greatest own goals. But like I say, what do I know? They've endured. But this is about Revenge of the Cybermen, not the Cybermen in general. So let's get on with it. We can take it as read, I don't care about the Cybermen anymore, and obviously that becomes a big stumbling block when it comes to enjoying Revenge of the Cybermen. However, I don't want you to think that I'm judging Revenge of the Cybermen solely on the Cybermen, because they're not the only element in it. It is still rubbish. It starts to run out of steam in episode 2, which is very early on for a 4-part story to begin falling apart. and it feels very plodding as it goes about its business. Now, perhaps being spoiled by Genesis of the Daleks coming directly before, which carried with it an almost epiphanous quality, this has none of the intricacies, the heart or the brains that story had in just one of its 6 parts, and so it's really frustrating in how it moves forwards, seemingly focusing on the least interesting stuff. But what of the story's merits? Because there are some, for sure. The dead on the beacon at the start, though clearly mannequins if you're looking closely, is quite a moody beginning. And dead bodies upon arrival at a destination will always be foreboding, and it's a great way to start a Doctor Who story. Now, having already been to this place before lends this some more mystery than usual. And in fact, returning to the beacon at a different point in its time is a rather nice touch. I know the decision will have come from money saving, but regardless, it's a decision which has artistic implications which actually work. It means a different story can be told at the same time as giving the whole season the feeling of being of a piece. And I quite like that. And although filmed before Genesis, this story on screen continues Tom Baker's more assured command of the role from that story. So maybe it's that he found it here and carried it through to filming Genesis, but either way, he is way more at ease here than he was in the opening trio of season 12 stories.
Who's the homicidal maniac?
With that beautiful avuncularity that he carries is just absolutely sublime. It's one of those moments where you can see how differently other Doctors might have approached it. The line, "Who's the homicidal maniac?" carries with it 2 very damning words which would have suited Hartnell and Pertwee's inherent disdain. And in fact, actually, if they'd said that line, you can imagine them sort of spitting it out with their typical bristliness. But Tom asks it in the same way as he would ask someone their name. And so it's choices like these that he will come to make more of as he goes on that mark him out as precisely the man for the job. He's thinking like the Doctor now, and it makes for really entertaining watching. It's the same with his delightful deconstruction of the offered solution for the missing recordings, that a virus did it. Now, his takedown of that is gloriously withering, but it doesn't lose any of that sort of like friendly benevolence that his incarnation has. It's effervescent, and it envelops him like a cloak. He's also rather sparkling when the Doctor is arguing with the Cyber leader, calling them tin soldiers and so on. And this mix of sparkle and steel is combining in a really effective way. I still wouldn't say he has had the confident and swaggering debut season that Pertwee had, but I might venture that Tom's Doctor is the more interesting of the 2 early doors. The performances on the whole aren't bad, to be honest. Kelman in particular is very well done, and he offers up something for Harry to brush up against, which he does with aplomb. Harry remains very capable and as stoic as ever, and I really, really like him, more than I remember liking him before, and certainly more than I was expecting to on this marathon. He holds his own against the aforementioned Kelman, and later delivers news of his death so wonderfully casually.
It seems that Kelman, he's dead by the way.
And knowing what Doctor Who fans certain corners of the League of Gentlemen are, I'm convinced there is a reference to this in their film The League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse. When Jeff is informing Harelip that Hilary Briss is dead, he does it in exactly the same way. Then there's the moment where he does the wrong thing, trying to do the right thing. And this is another instance which marks out Tom's approach to the role being vastly different from Pertwee's.
Harry Sullivan is an imbecile!
From Pertwee's Doctor, for me, doesn't bear thinking about. But Tom, as he did when goading Sarah in the Ark in Space, manages to imbue it with exactly the right energy so as not to feel unpalatable. Now, one of the reasons for this is the line directly before it. Now, the imbecile line is the one that gets quoted all of the time, but I much prefer...
Did you make the rocks fall, Harry?
The way that Tom plays that as a lead-in is what makes the outburst work, in my view. And Ian Marter reacts to it like a boss. I think he's been a revelation. I already think that Elizabeth Sladen is sublime as Sarah, so if you add in Ian Marter's Harry with Tom's increasingly dazzling Doctor, and this could, if they'd stuck together longer, been the very best TARDIS team in the entire show. Unfortunately, it doesn't coalesce into a particularly good story for me. The Vogans look unfortunate. The biggest crime there isn't necessarily a design one, it's that I don't understand. You're going to cake all of that stuff onto Kevin Stoney so that he's incapable of giving as memorable a performance as he usually does. What are you playing at? And the whole thing just feels cobbled together around the rather underwhelming things that the Cybermen have now become. A really disappointing turn of events, because it could, after 7 years away, have returned them to glory, but instead all it does is kind of have the effect on me that I now think they should have been left consigned to the 60s. 401 episodes in now, and the Fourth Doctor has well and truly arrived. Now, while this might have been a significant letdown for me on the marathon, because the story that was just before it, which I thought was excellent, was actually filmed after it. If it all fell into place there, that gives me encouragement for going forward. Now, obviously, yeah, I've marathoned before. I know what there is to come. But I always have to remind myself that the Revenge of the Cybermen isn't necessarily a signifier of what is to come. It's just a kind of stumble.
It removes tape from radio logs. It must be a very literate and inquisitive virus.
The spinny thing representing Voga as the beacon hurtles towards it is leaves a lot to be desired, but I think I'm actually going to go for the Cybermen themselves. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this sneering at Cybermen, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit the like thumb and give it a share. It'd be great to get as many Doctor Who fans along for the marathon. And what do you think of this one? Is it a huge come down after Genesis of the Daleks, or do you actually prefer it to that one? Is it therefore a massive return to glory for the Cybermen, or do you think they deserved better after 7 years away? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a recap of Season 12. So, if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you soon.